In this video, I'm going to give the biblical case against mass immigration. Now, before I do that, I want to firstly give you my credentials. I have both, in fact, been an immigrant, and my favourite person in the entire world, my wife, is an immigrant. She is from Bulgaria. So whenever I say that mass immigration is something that the Bible is not supportive of, well, it's not because I'm some jingoistic psychopath, at least as far as I'm aware.
Psycho.
Imagine the scenario. You're asleep at night time when you wake up to the sound of someone knocking at your door. You go downstairs and outside there's a woman and several children. She explains that there has been a massive riot in her area and that she and her family have been forced to flee. Now in this scenario you have a large house, lucky you, congratulations on that. And you do the right thing, you invite them to come on in and stay with you for as long as they need. Have you done a good and moral and righteous act? Of course you have, congratulations.
Great job, everyone.
Word begins to spread that you are the kind of person who will do this sort of thing, and other families start to show up, and you willingly take them in once again. Again, is that a good and moral and righteous act? Absolutely. But over time you start to realise that some of those showing up have not in fact been kicked out of their home. They simply didn't live in as nice a home and they fancied coming to yours for better free accommodation. You also start to notice that a lot of them are not women and children. In fact, very few of them are. 90% are young men. And not only that, but a lot of them are the kind of young men that the original women and children were fleeing. Furthermore, your own family is starting to bear a significant cost. The price of accommodation has risen to unsustainable levels, violent and sexual crimes are through the roof, and the original values of the household that made it a good place to live are being eroded and replaced. Now let me ask another question. Are you still doing a moral and righteous act by letting everybody who shows up to your door in? No, by the way, is the answer to that. You're not.
No.
Okay, so let me make 4 points when it comes to analysing immigration from a Christian perspective. I know I normally only do 3 points, but we had some government funding come through and we've decided to expand things out to include an entire extra point for this video. Very exciting. Point 1. Immigration stats say very little about individual immigrants. If I show you a graph that says that men are on average taller than women, or that the world's best endurance runners come from East Africa, or that Northern Irish people are unusually smart and handsome, well, what it does tell you is a trend, but it doesn't tell you anything about the individual in question. You might meet a tall woman, you might meet an East African who is not a professional endurance athlete, you might meet a Northern Irish person, and that Northern Irish person could be me. Aww. So just because when we're analysing trends, it doesn't tell you anything about how you should treat or view the person in front of you. It doesn't tell you whether or not they are a net positive or a net negative. Elon Musk, for instance, is an immigrant to the United States, but I think we could safely say that he is a net positive for the US economy. I don't think that's a particularly radical take, and there will be many other individuals like him who are there for entirely legitimate reasons and are doing great stuff. So just because certain stats and trend lines exist when it comes to immigration doesn't tell you anything about the individual person in front of you. You shouldn't mistreat someone simply because they're from elsewhere. In fact, as Christians, we should give people the benefit of the doubt. We should love them regardless. We should take care of them. All of those verses that we often hear misapplied when it comes to this topic are true when it comes to your personal interactions. You should care for the stranger. You should look out for them and you should seek to help them in the same way that you would anybody else regardless of where they are from. At the same time, that doesn't mean that everybody in the entire world gets to move to your nation for whatever reason. This is not particularly complex. It's not rocket science.
This isn't rocket science, it's brain surgery.
Point 2. The Ordo Amoris. That is not a Harry Potter spell. Nope, it's the biblical idea that you are not supposed to treat everybody equally. I know, clutch your pearls, but hear me out for a second. We know this. We know that you're not supposed to treat everybody's wives the same way as you treat your own wife. You're not supposed to treat total strangers in the exact same way as you treat friends. You're not supposed to treat other people's families the same way you treat your own family. If you don't do this, you're a freak and a weirdo. Of course you treat people differently. And there's a biblical term for doing so. It's the order of loves, or that fancy Latin term that I used about 30 seconds ago.
Accio Fireball!
This also operates in the political and national sphere. You are supposed to love your own country more than you love other countries. Now, you're not supposed to hate other countries, but you are supposed to love your own more. Governments, similarly, are supposed to look out for their own country more than any other country. When God established the kingship of Israel, what country were they responsible for? Israel. What country were they supposed to protect the citizens of? Israel. And the same applies to all of our governments. Who are governments supposed to look out for? Well, they're supposed to look out for their own citizens. The notion of America first is a perfectly natural and good thing for Americans. In the same way that Britain first is a natural and good thing for Britons, India first is a natural and good thing for Indians, Ghana first is a natural and good thing for Ghanaians. Obviously, this could be abused. Just because you love your own family doesn't mean you get to, invade your neighbour, even if you really like the extension that they've built outside the back of their house. Now, when it comes to immigration, what that means is that the primary lens through which this should be looked is, are the people that we are letting in here a good thing for our citizens? Maybe they provide certain skills that our nation is lacking. Maybe they're married to one of them. Sup, babe? Maybe they bring in a certain amount of finance. Now, occasional exceptions can be made in extreme circumstances, but these should, number one, be rare, and number two, should be done with a view to moving people towards adding value to the nation that they are now in. A good way to ensure this, by the way, is to say to those who show up claiming to be fleeing from somewhere that, well, you are going to be safe here, but we're not going to provide everything for you. You're not going to get to live in a luxury hotel and get free money from the taxpayer. You're going to pay your own way. All of these things are a good way to ensure that the government is following this order of loves, that it is doing what it should be doing for the benefit of its own citizens. That brings us to point 3, which is that mass immigration very clearly has some significant downsides. Now, are there potential upsides to immigration, even on a fairly large scale? I would say there are, but there are also some negatives that need to be watched out for. And I'll put it under 3 C's. The first one being costs. Now, I run a food bank distribution centre here in Northern Ireland, and so I deal with people who don't have a lot of money. Do you know what the primary driver of poverty is here in the UK? Well, it's housing costs. Housing costs are absolutely exorbitant compared to the average salary. Do you know what the primary driver of housing costs are? Well, it's mass immigration. We import roughly 600,000 people net per annum, and we don't have houses for all those people, so the demand goes up, the supply stays roughly the same, and therefore prices rise. Now, no one seems to want to talk about this, but when you map the beginning of this rise in house prices, it maps perfectly with when the Blair government opened the doors to mass immigration. Now, again, this is not a universal truth. Different backgrounds will bring different costs and different benefits. For instance, Denmark did a study. They found that Western migrants added a lot of value to their economy, but they found that non-Western migrants actually were a net negative, economically speaking. This needs to be factored in. Now, the next factor that needs to be thought about is crime. Of course, when you have a majority population in a country, they're going to be the people that commit the most crime. Of course, lots of migrants are very well behaved in the countries they go to, but at the same time, non-Western migrants are vastly overrepresented per capita when it comes to violent crimes, sexual assaults, and grooming gangs. 70% of the violent crimes in Paris last year were carried out by non-French participants. They do not make up 70% of the population of Paris. Furthermore, African migrants committed 52% of the crimes, whilst only making up 3.2% of the population. They're overrepresented by a factor of 16. That's not great, is it? Okay, I don't think that's controversial to say. I don't think we should be importing a bunch of people who will violently assault those who live here.
You're not allowed to say that.
Yep.
That needs to be factored in. It absolutely does. Okay, the third C is culture. Now, I love Northern Irish people, okay? I think we're great.
Well.
But at the same time, if all 1.9 million of us move to a country with a much smaller population, let's say like Iceland, I think it's got about 300,000, well, what would that mean? Well, it would mean the end of Iceland. You wouldn't have Iceland anymore. Iceland would cease to exist. Even if it exists on paper, its culture, its history would be eroded and replaced by all of these Northern Irish people moving in. And I happen to think that that would be a bad thing. I think cultures are broadly speaking worth preserving, at least in the elements that are good and godly, which in Western culture, quite a lot of our history, quite a lot of our social mores are positive. They're good things. Well, when you bring in as many people as are currently being brought in to the West, you are eroding the culture. 1 in 6 people living in Britain were not born there. 1 in 36 people in the Republic of Ireland moved there in the last 12 months. That is wiping out the historic culture of those places. This is particularly true, by the way, if you're bringing in massive amounts of people from cultures that are incompatible with historic Western culture. And according to Deuteronomy and Isaiah, this happening to your nation is not a blessing, it is in fact a curse and a judgment from God. And this brings us to point 4. When migration poses a serious threat to the citizens of a country, the biblical thing to do is to prevent it. There's a lot of people talking about women and children fleeing war, and actually, to be honest, I would quite happily have a policy where we would accept women and children. But when you have 11,000 African migrants show up on that island in Italy, the lamp one, you know that one?
I love lamp.
And this island only has a population of 6,000 people, and of those who landed there, there was nary a woman or a wean amongst them. Well, actually, there are people that are under threat there, but it's not those who have arrived, it's the citizens of the island. So when you have folks like Justin Welby or Russell Moore standing up and saying, well, the Bible commands us to show hospitality to the strangers and love our neighbours, I want to point out a couple of things. Firstly, no one asks what the Bible has to say to those who would, break into someone else's country. What does Jesus have to say about breaking an entry? He's not for it, by the way, just in case you were wondering.
I do not like this.
Secondly, they don't seem to ask whether or not this is the most relevant scripture in that instance. Take, for instance, someone breaking into your house. If someone breaks into your house and your family are there, are you showing a lack of hospitality or love for your neighbour by removing them, by calling the police, by getting them out of your house? No, you're not. It's not relevant in this instance. Furthermore, I think they absolutely know this. All of those people who were saying things like build bridges, not walls a few years ago, I'm pretty sure they live in a house with walls, okay? They probably don't live under a bridge, unless they're a troll. Could happen, but it's unlikely.
You trolled the troll.
So whilst there's a lot of talk about protecting the vulnerable and the innocent in this discussion, sometimes that in fact means the women and the children and the impoverished people in your own nation for whom you bear primary responsibility. We need to factor that into this discussion. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sure this will have gone down terribly with most audiences, but please do, tap the like button, don't smash it, you'll damage your phone. You can also support the channel through Patreon or PayPal or wearecontramundum.com. If you like this on Twitter, you can retweet it, and if you are on YouTube, watch this next one.